The Airbnb market is in the middle of an epic decline. According to recent data, some even believe this could be the collapse of the Airbnb economy and, in certain markets, the beginning of a housing crisis. In certain urban areas, the number of Airbnb listings right now more than doubles the number of homes that are for sale on market. Yet, when we look at bookings in some of the top metropolitan areas for Airbnb, they're way down. So what does that all mean? What does it mean for housing economies in local markets? What does it mean for Airbnb? And where does that leave people who are hosting or just looking to travel? My name is Matt Thomas. I'm a real estate agent with Baird & Warner Real Estate here in Chicago. I help buyers, sellers, investors make smarter decisions with their real estate needs every single day. I'm also an Airbnb property manager. I manage my own property. My basement is an Airbnb approved by Cook County in the city of Chicago for short-term rentals. I also manage a duplex in Peoria, Illinois, near Bradley University for midterm rentals more than short-term rentals. So when I share a little bit of insight on how Airbnb has been impacted, it's coming from a personal place. I have seen our bookings sway with time. I've certainly seen sways in the demand for short to midterm housing. And here in Chicago, take all of that out of it, we've seen some crazy changes in regulations over the last few years that make it, frankly speaking, much more difficult to have an Airbnb in the first place. If you haven't already, share this video with somebody who might find it useful, anybody who's thinking about getting active in Airbnb, investing themselves, or hiring a property manager. If you own an Airbnb and you want a second opinion, maybe you want some help managing it, I offer Airbnb management solutions. Please get in touch. I'm happy to discuss options available and to help you talk about ways you can optimize your listing to make more money today. One step at a time. Let's back up here. Where is this all coming from? Why are people under the impression that the Airbnb market is collapsing? This all started with a tweet from Nick Gurley. He's the CEO of Reventure Consulting. He also runs one of the largest real estate YouTube channels out there. And a few days back, Nick tweeted out that the Airbnb collapse is very real. Specifically, here was the tweet. Nick was looking at the revenue for some of the largest producing Airbnb cities in the United States and how drastically down they are year over year. Not only that, but looking at the number of Airbnb listings that are active in some marketplaces compared to the number of homes for sale, there's a really concerning fear that if these revenues are so far down that these Airbnb owners no longer can sustain those Airbnb properties, what happens to them? Do they flood the market and therefore prices drop because of a massive influx of inventory? Do they just keep holding on to these losing assets and make them long-term rentals, maybe driving prices up there? If you look at the Phoenix metro area, there are almost double the inventory for Airbnb rentals as compared to regular for-sale homes. Meanwhile, revenue is down 50% year over year. So you have this marketplace full of listings that aren't getting booked. They're not bringing in the revenue that they're expecting. These owners, in many cases, are probably losing money or they're very close to it. Phoenix isn't alone in this issue. You look at places like Austin or San Antonio, you've got revenues down significantly year over year. This has direct impacts on the local real estate market. These owners who rely on Airbnb to make income on their properties are in a position where they're losing money. This can only happen for so long before they have to make alternative decisions. On top of this, you have changing regulations in many markets. Here in Chicago, for example, when I went to apply to make my basement of my home an Airbnb or get approval for a partial room rental, I had to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that this is my primary residence. Chicago is not issuing Airbnb licenses for people who are using it on an investment. It must be your primary residence. So the fact that I live in a single family home and I can rent out my in-law suite basement as a partial rental is how I'm able to do this. But if this was a 2-unit building and that was unit 2 downstairs, I wouldn't be able to get approval for that unit. That's how specific and strict Cook County is on Airbnb licensing. Take that one step further. Many municipalities, for example, the property I manage in Peoria, are no longer issuing licenses. And instead, owners who want to get active in any sort of rental market that's under your traditional 1-year lease are forced to do over 29 nights. So a midterm rental, 30 to 90 days using a flexible month-to-month lease. It's a workaround. It's not quite a short-term rental because the licensing laws are so restrictive. it does allow for access to this whole midterm rental market. I think this is where we're going to see a lot of these markets moving. If you're looking out in Phoenix and the short-term rental has gone through the floor, midterm rental is the next logical course. Do you have traveling sales rep, traveling nurses, traveling demand for, probably not summer in Phoenix, but maybe fall or winter for snowbirds that you can book out and facilitate in a slightly different way, assuming that non-traditional rentals are still your intended path forward. Do I think Airbnb is dying? No, I got a booking on my Peoria property this week on Airbnb, and I got another one lined up for several months from now. There are still plenty of active users on Airbnb who are looking for places to stay. There are still many communities where Airbnb will thrive for the foreseeable future. But what this is all indicating is a change in consumer behavior, and where it's headed is some potentially really frightening things for certain real estate markets. So the change in consumer behavior has to do with less travel. Some of it's discretionary spending. Some of it's just less flexibility to work from wherever the hell you want. We are going back to a world where people are coming back home. We're seeing fewer transient workers, fewer people working away from the office full time, and this demand for Airbnb that skyrocketed, particularly in areas that were outdoorsy or high vacation. You're starting to see that dwindle. And we're going to continue to see that dwindle as discretionary spending gets limited and as more people come back to work. But it's dwindling back to what I would call a more normal state. I don't believe that this marketplace is collapsing. I think it's overweighted right now. You have far too many homes for list on Airbnb or other resources that are just getting flooded right now. Consumers have too many choices. They're not using those choices. Prices are going to come down. This is no different than when we have an overweighted real estate market with too many listings for sale. Here's the backside of this. In some markets, let's say Chicago, for example, where Airbnbs aren't super prevalent and regulation is high, we don't have an abundance of listings. So therefore, even though revenues are down for Chicago listings, just like they are in many cities, they're not down to a significant degree where we're worried about a housing collapse. I don't have a million Airbnbs sitting here in Chicagoland that I'm worried are going to flood the marketplace and bring prices down. It's just not going to happen. We don't have that type of inventory. Versus somewhere like Phoenix, where you do have many people who bought probably with a balloon payment or some kind of ARM interest rate. They may or may not have made great money for a few years on their property, but now it's getting tougher. That leads to some really interesting questions. Do those people decide to sell? And if they sell, if they're flooding the market, what does that do to the pricing there? What does that do to demand for housing if all of a sudden there's an abundance of choice? Traditionally speaking, it'll bring prices down. And I think if it were to flood the market all at one time, if Airbnb, some regulation was passed in Phoenix that makes it a lot more difficult on top of the revenue demand being down, you could see a housing collapse based on the number of rental homes that are there. In some ways, this is the argument for why cities have put in licensing in the first place. Chicago's argument since day one is we want to protect homeowners in Cook County. We want to make the licenses for these transient temporary rentals more difficult to get so that we don't have this risk of homes on the marketplace that are no longer collecting revenue that could flood back and collapse pricing. That's the whole idea. There was a little bit of future-proofing done when they did that. So in these communities where there's really very few restrictions or no licensing at all, yes, it's going to be a rough adjustment. And that's why this year when you're seeing things like entire towns, districts, cities making short-term rentals illegal, that's a very painful process for owners, obviously, but it's going to continue as cities struggle to figure out where Airbnb should or does live within their cityscape and their resale. If I'm reading this data correctly, I think areas where you should be concerned or areas where this might have a legitimate, tangible impact in the near future are areas where you have a plethora of Airbnb listings and a deficit of housing for sale. Places like Phoenix, places like certain spots in Texas, Austin are going to be popular. Certain spots of Tennessee. I can't imagine all these Smoky Mountain rentals that everybody bought however many months ago are continuing to rent out with the same level of demand that they reviewed them at. So there's going to be some vacation and some large city markets that were overloaded with Airbnbs that probably are going to have to deal with some nasty pricing issues as those Airbnb owners get frustrated with the lack of revenue they're dealing with. Now, Airbnb has pushed back on this, saying that their bookings are through the roof. They've never been higher. They're seeing more people seek experiences and one-night stays than ever before. And they might be right. It could be that the demand for Airbnb is still there. It's just shifting away from some of these metro markets where it was a work from home or work on the go type situation and moving into what Airbnb has always been, like a cool travel experience where you can book a jungle retreat if you want to. It's probably somewhere in the middle. I don't know that the Airbnb economy has completely crashed. I don't believe that Airbnb is all sunshine and roses and having the best year ever. What I take away from this is flexibility with Airbnb is critical if you're going to go into it as an investor. So if you're going to buy a place and your only strategy for profiting on that location is Airbnb short-term rental, that's a very concerning approach. The reason being, you have no backup plan. If that property isn't profitable with a long-term rental, if you don't have any plan, approach, or tactic to do midterm rentals, the licensing could change overnight. You could have competition pop up that drops pricing. You could see what we're seeing now, which is demand just drops away. Now all of a sudden you're carrying a mortgage note that you didn't plan on because Airbnb or short-term rental isn't working out for you. I think that's a really poor strategy. This is just such a new investing track. We don't have enough data and trailing history to really accurately predict how consistent you can make money with Airbnb over the long term. Even though every guru out there will tell you it's the most profitable thing ever, I think you should go into this with some caution. For example, when I bought my home because I wanted to buy a home. It had Airbnb potential, which is fantastic, and I absolutely am looking forward to taking an income from the basement so that it can go towards my monthly mortgage. But I didn't buy this place with that in mind, nor would I have bought it specifically based on those numbers. Or looking at my duplex in Peoria. When we actually started setting those units up, we fully intended to be a short-term rental until the city of Peoria politely, kind of politely, declined our request. No more licensing in your neighborhood. Absolutely not. You cannot do that. So we had to pivot. We went and we're now a midterm rental. We do nothing under 29 nights. We meet the letter of the law. We are doing everything that we're supposed to in Peoria to not be a short-term rental, but still make the most of those profits. But we knew that would work. We knew that traveling sales reps, traveling nurses, even just short-term housing for summer school at Bradley University, we knew there was demand for that. Not only that, but as a backup, a third worst case scenario, my owner also knows that she would profit in that building if we were to flip tomorrow to a long-term rental. So our discussions, my discussion with her as a property manager are, listen, we have options. Short-term is ideal, midterm is great, long-term is less than ideal, but still profitable. That's 3 approaches to profitability on one property, and that's a much more secure investment than, hey, I bought this place in Austin that if it books out at 85% occupancy, I can make a few grand a month. Good luck, maybe. It looks like the revenue's way down, occupancy could go to shit, maybe the neighbor starts renting, license changes. There's just so much that could go wrong or change that's completely out of your control, and that's really what you're working against. So if I'm reading anything, take the market collapse out of it, take the speculation away from it. If I'm thinking about getting into investing in Airbnb today, I'm only looking at opportunities that have a backup plan. At very least, I want opportunities that I can use as a traditional long-term rental if Airbnb short-term doesn't work out for me. Best case, midterm's an option as well. All of this involves studying your local rules to make sure you're acting in accordance with the law, because last thing you want to do is get slapped with some heavy fine because you rented in a way you weren't supposed to. If you are in a market where you're seeing a heavy amount of Airbnb listings and not enough for sale, somewhere like Phoenix, somewhere like Tennessee, it's safe to say changes are coming. It might not be a collapse. It might not be a drastic bottom fall out of the housing market, but there's probably going to be some pain. And I do think it makes sense to get ahead of that by strategizing for ways to get out of that pain. Once again, evaluate your alternatives. Is there anything else you can do with that property that is no longer making revenue as an Airbnb to alternatively bring in cash flow? That's your focus. Alternative ways to bring in cash flow. I hope this helps. I don't know where the future is going, nor do I really know what direct impacts this is going to have on every specific market. I feel in some ways thankful that Chicago's been a pain in the ass for so long with Airbnb licenses, because the result is now when we see this massive rapid change in short-term rental demand, we are not seeing the risk of the bottom falling out here in Chicago. If you look in other markets where now all these short-term rentals might just pop on market as long-term rentals, that could flood pricing there too. So there's always a downhill effect of whatever these owners decide to do. And it'll be really interesting to see what decisions they make over the next 6 to 9 to 12 months as markets continue to shift and licensing and regulation moves. Thanks again for watching. Hopefully this was useful for you. Like, subscribe to this channel, share this video with somebody once again. And hey, happy investing out there. If you're investing in an Airbnb, best of luck. There's still plenty of profit to be made, but do it the right way. Run your math, have a backup plan, and make sure you understand the local regulations.